this is clearly now what appears to be a very tragic set of circumstances. We hold out hope that we may be able to find Gus and return him to his family.
Yeah, it's a pretty hard time. Hard time for everybody. 4 days is hard for a 4-year-old.
A small boy vanished from a place everyone thought was safe. The land there seems endless, the kind of wide country where sound drops away and the world feels stripped down to heat and sky. People who live in those parts know how quickly daylight can change everything. For the Lamont family, a late afternoon that might have been ordinary turned into something no parent should ever face. The boy's name is Gus. The date is September 27, 2025. The property is a remote sheep station about 40 kilometers south of a tiny settlement called Yanta, in the far northeast of South Australia. When the first searches began, neighbors, family friends, and local police combed the homestead and its immediate surrounds. They looked in the places a child would normally hide: behind the shed, by the water tank, in the paddock. When no one found him, more people came. Volunteers arrived in their utes. Helicopters and drones circled overhead. For several days, the search was a community's heartbeat, urgent, heavy, and full of hope. Then searchers found a small footprint in the red soil, roughly half a kilometer from the house. The tread looked like the little boots Gus had been wearing that day. For a moment, everyone who wanted him home believed they were on the right path. But hope needs verification. Investigators later called the impression inconclusive. It was photographed and logged, but officials said they could not definitively link the print to Gus. That one lead offered sharp optimism and deep frustration at once. The land where Gus disappeared is not an ordinary park or backyard. It is open, raw, and in many places unforgiving. Temperatures often rise above 40 degrees during the day, then fall sharply at night. The ground is cracked and uneven, dotted with thorny scrub and old animal burrows. A small child lost in that environment faces multiple dangers: dehydration, heat stroke during the day, and cold at night. People who study survival say a young child alone like that is unlikely to travel far or to survive long without shelter or water. Yet the search found only that single print and then silence, an absence of the expected trail that leaves investigators and locals asking how a child could disappear without signs of a path. As days turned into weeks, the story gathered other threads. Rumors circulated in small towns and spilled quickly online. In the age of phones and social media, an image travels faster than the person who took it. People posted potential sightings, some sincere, others mistaken, and a frightening number that seemed manufactured. Accounts pretending to be family members surfaced. Edited images and automated posts swarmed feeds. The online noise became its own kind of problem, a distraction that pulled attention and resources away from carefully planned search grids. False reports are not harmless. Each unverified sighting must be checked. Every false lead sends teams to places that might not matter, consumes volunteers' time, and gives a family a burst of hope that may be cruelly misplaced. Investigators had to sift through that chaos, separate what might be credible from what was not, and keep the search on track. That is difficult when the entire community and people far beyond it want answers and feel compelled to help, even if their help takes the form of sharing a shaky photo or an unconfirmed memory. Weeks after those first frantic efforts, authorities returned with a different kind of search. The Australian Defence Force joined local police with equipment that wasn't used in the initial hours. Infrared drones that read heat, satellite imagery that can show subtle changes over time, and high-resolution mapping that highlights depressions and textures you can't see from the ground. These machines don't replace the people who walk the land, but they give those people new places to focus. The scans revealed thermal anomalies in certain areas, patches of ground that showed temperatures or patterns that were different from the surrounding Earth. To most of us, that sounds like jargon. Here's why it matters. Thermal imaging can reveal recent ground disturbance, sheltered hollows, animal dens, or, in narrow windows of time, residual warmth that might point to recent human presence. Satellite and mapping data can show where the surface looks uneven or where tracks or depressions changed over days. Put together, that data can point searchers back to places that were missed during the first sweep. Police officials were careful with their language. These are leads, potential sites for follow-up, not confirmations. The scans gave investigators a reason to look again in places that had been passed over or only glanced at. When people say new evidence, they often mean things like this: objective signals that something unusual is there and deserves examination. What those signals actually represent could vary wildly. They might be nothing more than a warmed patch of earth, an animal burrow, or a remnant of machinery. They might point to something more serious. Right now, the data is under analysis. Experts called into this case urge caution and clarity. Survival specialists point out that the heat and terrain make a long, unaided survival improbable for a 4-year-old. A child wandering into thick scrub would likely leave more traces: multiple footprints, torn clothing, dented plants, or some sign of struggle, evidence that was not clearly documented. Search and rescue coordinators say thermal scans and high-resolution maps are powerful tools that narrow areas for careful human examination, but they must be validated on the ground. In other words, the machines guide where people should look. They don't, by themselves, identify what happened. When people try to make sense of what happened to Gus, several possibilities come to mind, and none can yet be ruled out. One is that he wandered too far and became lost, overcome by the heat and the ruggedness of the country. Another is that someone took him, perhaps a stranger who drove by on the nearby highway. A third is that he suffered an accidental injury and was concealed in a way that made him hard to find during the first searches. A final and complicated factor is the sheer volume of digital noise, posts and images that distracted attention from focused searches during crucial hours. For each of these possibilities, there are arguments that support it and arguments that call it into question. That tension is the hard, painful reality of investigating disappearances in remote places. For the family, the human story eclipses all the theories. The homestead where Gus lived has existed for generations. Red dust bleaches fence posts and rust stains iron gates. That life, shaped by sun, sheep, and weather, was ordinary until the evening Gus did not come in. His grandmother, who was watching him that day, has rarely spoken publicly since. Locals say she walks the property at dusk and calls his name into the air. The community has shown up. Strangers drove for hours to leave toys and notes at the gate, and vigils have been held under the wide, starry sky. Those gestures are small and deep, expressions of how loss in a place like this is felt by many hearts. Police and search teams have not stopped looking. Even after the first wave of search funding eased and headlines dimmed, investigators continued to review the earliest reports and newly captured satellite data. The case remains active. Every few months there is a fresh tip, a new piece of information that rekindles a searchlight. Sometimes those leads go nowhere. Sometimes they direct attention to a place that yields something new. That is how a long investigation works. Not just in big bursts, but with steady, repeated attention. There are important questions that deserve answers because they affect trust and outcomes in any missing person search. How was the footprint documented and handled? Were casts made? Who first identified it as resembling Gus's boots and on what basis? How exactly were the thermal anomalies recorded, date, time, and coordinates? And what steps did searchers take to validate them on the ground? These are not trivial details. Good forensic work depends on clear records and procedures so that evidence can be independently confirmed and used in the right way. It is also worth noting the cost of misinformation. When false posts proliferate, they create cycles of false hope for families and extra work for investigators. That does not mean the public should not be involved. On the contrary, the public can be an enormous help, especially when people respond with verifiable information, time-stamped photos, dashcam footage, or accounts with specific details. What matters is how information is shared. Sending tips to the police rather than amplifying uncertain social media claims helps keep the search focused and respectful. The new scans have done what good tools do. They narrowed the search and gave authorities places to look more carefully. That matters because in cases like this, every square meter investigated properly is a square meter more likely to reveal something. If samples are collected in the field, the standard process is to photograph the scene, record GPS coordinates and timestamps, and protect a chain of custody so that if forensic tests are needed later, the results are reliable. Police say that any material found in follow-up searches will be analyzed in a lab, compared against known samples, and released with careful wording. That is as it should be. As we watch this story, it is easy to fall into two mistakes. One is to assume that the presence of new evidence means everything has been solved. It does not. New evidence can be suggestive and still inconclusive. The other mistake is to assume nothing can be done. That would be defeatist. The reason a new search was launched is because the technology offered another chance. Not certainty, but possibility. Possibility matters when a family is waiting. If you live in a place where the land feels wide and familiar, you know how quickly an ordinary afternoon can become strange. You also know how communities gather at a gate, bring a candle, and lend a shoulder. That shared instinct is part of what keeps searches alive. It is also why accurate information matters, why investigators must preserve evidence carefully, and why the public should be asked to pass on verifiable tips rather than untested images. What happens next depends on several factors. If the thermal anomalies correspond to a place that yields physical evidence on the ground, then forensic testing may deliver clearer answers. If no material is found, investigators will need to explain what the scans likely showed and why they were not linked to the missing child. Either outcome requires patience and professional care. Meanwhile, the family continues to wait. The community continues to grieve and to hope. If you have anything that could help, a dashcam recording from that day, a photo with a clear timestamp, or something you remember that seems specific and credible, please contact the South Australia Police. Don't post raw, speculative claims that could mislead or waste time. Let the investigators examine what you have and determine how it fits with other pieces of the puzzle. This account has tried to be clear about what is known and what remains uncertain. The footprint found half a kilometer from the homestead and the thermal anomalies spotted by infrared scans are both important. Each one is a lead that needs careful scrutiny. Together they offer a reason to look again where the first search may have missed or misinterpreted something. That is not a guarantee of answers, but it is reason for focused effort. In the end, this is a human story more than a mystery to be solved on a screen. It is the story of a family whose life stopped on one late afternoon, a community that will not give up searching, and technology that offered a second look. It is also a reminder that in an age of instant images and viral rumors, the slow, careful work of searching, documenting, and analyzing still matters most. For now, the investigation remains active. The evidence is new and being examined. The questions are still profound. The search continues, and with each careful step there is a chance, however small, that something missed the first time will finally come into the light. If you know anything that could help, call South Australia Police. If you are moved to respond, do it in a way that helps the search, with verifiable details, timestamps, and direct communications to the authorities. That is how a community makes its best case for finding the truth.